Food has been around since the beginning of time, but its production and serving methods have changed substantially. New sciences and foods have become discovered, and they have been spread out to many different regions, and as people became pickier, more foods became available to more places. When fire and tools such as the wheel were discovered, humans were able to domesticate animals easier and cook food to make it easier to digest and chew. Other tools such as axes, spears, or large pointed rocks were used to kill animals and also to harvest plants. As time went on, these primitive tools became more developed and evolved into tools now such as pickaxes, hoes, or the John Deere plow. Women were mostly in charge of gathering, while men did more hunting. However, both jobs were equally as difficult, but in different ways. Gathering required, and still requires, lots of arm and back strength, as well as endurance, in order to be able to cut down trees and harvest plants efficiently.
Because animals were a large part of the farming industry, and if they had gotten angry easily and were disobedient, then they would not be able to produce for the farmers.
Also, not all plants could thrive in every place. Plants can only grow where the climate is appropriate and if the plant is in season. For example, one cannot grow blueberries in Rhode Island during April because they are not available during that season. This provided a challenge to many because foods that were easily prepared in one season or in one region that could not be produced in another. The original organic meal with no chemical, pesticides, or mass producing whatsoever was the grass-fed meal. The grass-fed meal followed the philosophy that animals need to eat what they are made to, which most of the times is grass. In present times, many animals are not fed grass, as they should be, but instead grains like corn or even meat of their own kind. This is because it makes the animal fatter, thus giving more meat to the producer.
Geographic luck, as Jared Diamond says, is the most influential aspect of why some countries prosper and why some don't. More plants can grow in specific places, such as the Fertile Crescent, and if plants and animals do not grow in specific places, then that region may not prosper as much. The Ice Age also destroyed many crops that had previously grown, and killed many animals so that they could not grow for a long time afterwards. The beginning of agriculture started out with the simple domestication of plants and animals. When they were domesticated, people were able to produce a sufficient amount of food needed, and then some. They were able to control the amount of food produced, how it was produced, and where the food was distributed. The beginning of agriculture started out with the simple domestication of plants and animals. When they were domesticated, people were able to produce a sufficient amount of food needed, and then some. They were able to control the amount of food produced, how it was produced, and where the food was distributed. One of the 5 themes of food is diffusion of foodstuffs. As people started to spread and migrate, so did their food and cooking methods. People brought with them, when they moved, food types and styles, and the native people of the lands where they moved to started to adopt these new methods, and over time they spread. Foods can spread out in a latitudinal way better rather than in a longitudinal way because on any latitudinal line, the climate is relatively the same, so the same types of food can be grown. On any longitudinal lines, the climate changes because the regions are all different distances from the sun, so the regions have different fruit and animals that can be grown.
After people started to trade food, such as the Columbian Exchange, primitive food storage techniques were adopted. They allowed food to be kept for much longer of a time than what nature would allow. Radiocarbon dating tells archaeologists that some of the earliest stone structures were advanced food storage systems. Versions of the food storage containers could also be found in other places around the world. This allowed people in ancient times to store foods such as cereal crops regardless of the weather outside.
Ever since the establishment of government, food has been regulated and controlled by certain government departments or groups. These departments or groups will distribute the food as needed or make decisions in times of need. This is known as the state allocation of food, one of the 5 themes of food. These government organizations do not always, however, please the public. For instance, in France during the Women's Bread March on Versailles, food riots erupted because King Louis XVI refused to supply bread for the working population and was not willing to come up with a solution.
Prosperous regions with a strong government often resulted in a large surplus of foods because there was so much available from the government and the geographic luck. This assurance of food and the way the government controlled it is called the state allocation of food. The government decides how to distribute the food and who to.
People in Ireland around 1845 depended on potatoes as their staple food. However, when the potato famine struck, many people died off. The potatoes became infected and people were unable to eat them. People had to learn to eat other foods and depend on them, but they could not do so fast enough and many people died.
As has been for many years in history, class distinctions played a large role in deciding what types of food were purchased for who. Higher class people were able to afford large quantities of food and at a high quality, while the working class were able to only afford the lesser quality of the foods and in a less amount. Food is arguably the most important thing in our world at any time in history. Because of this, people have been known to get overly excited or angry about food. The act of hunting and gathering food was enough to sustain small tribes and villages. However, the industrial world of America would never have made it as far without a food source that was bigger and better than all the rest. The goal is to raise food cheaply and quickly, and not always under the conditions the consumer would like. However, it is clear that the population of the world would not nearly be what it is today without this industrial food.
Big Mac. Big Mac. Big Mac.
I need a double cheeseburger and hold the lettuce. Don't be frontin', son, no seeds on the bun. We be up in the drive-thru, order for two. I got a craving for a number 9, lock my shoe. We need some chicken up in here, in this sizzle. Gorilla, my mizzle, extra salt on the frizzle. Dr. Pepper, my brother, another for your mother. Double, super size, and don't forget the fries.